This presentation will highlight the revisions needed to the Self-Study Design Report following the visit by Dr. Robert Schneider, Middle States Staff Liaison, to Harcum College on April 25, 2014. Let's take a quick review of the Middle States standards. The standards of excellence are divided into two categories: institutional effectiveness addressed in standards 1 through 7, and educational effectiveness addressed in standards 8 to 14. We will also be looking at the federal regulations, and although these are not Middle States standards, the Commission is obligated to the federal government to ensure that institutions that it accredits comply with these federal regulations. The revised Self-Study Design Report will clearly outline how the self-study report will address each standard as stated in the Characteristics of Excellence in Higher Education, the Blue Book. We need to elaborate on the charges of the Steering Committee and working groups. The revised Self-Study Design Report will clearly state the 7 charges to the Steering Committee. Steering Committee members serve as chairs of the working groups. They will lead the working groups in finding and analyzing the recommended documents applicable to each standard. They will review the submission of the working group chapters for the self-study report and adhere to timelines established by the Steering Committee chair. They will maintain all documentation submitted by the working groups. They will write the chapters pertaining to each standard of excellence to be submitted for the self-study report. They will submit the completed self-study report chapters to the Accreditation Liaison Officer for review and revise chapters as needed for final submission. And lastly, review recommendations made by the working groups and prioritize each recommendation for action. The revised Self-Study Design Report will also indicate the 9 charges to the working groups, who will develop analytical questions for each standard that answers to the description of each standard. Ensure that each fundamental element of the standards of excellence is addressed for each standard. Identify the required documents that support the fundamental element of each standard. Analyze data for each standard and report findings to the working group chairs. Adhere to timelines established by the Steering Committee. Follow the guidelines per the reporting template. Use the document roadmap as a guide in finding the required documents that will answer each working group question and fundamental element, along with the self-study creating a useful process and report. Meet on the first and third Tuesday of each month from 1 p.m. to 2:30 p.m. Working group chairs will guide the working group members and submit reports in the following manner, modeling that of a research report. Provide an abstract, an introduction, the methods used, results, discussion of the results, and proposals for improvement. In regard to the working group structure as noted in the Self-Study Design Report, Dr. Schneider suggested improvements that could enable the working groups to function more effectively. As a result of these suggestions, the following action has been taken. Separation of Standard 13 to stand alone, adding another working group, Group I. Pulling working group members from Groups A to H to form Group I. Remove Standard 10 from Group E and place Standard 10 with Group G. Now that we have a new and improved alignment of the working groups, let's identify the 5 phases of the self-study process and who is involved. The planning stage involves the Steering Committee, and that is where we currently are at this time. Research is completed by the working groups. Writing of the self-study report starts with the working groups and is submitted to the steering committee for review and revision. Review of the drafts of the self-study report is performed by the college community, and the site visit prep will be performed by the Office of the President and the ALO. Harcum's self-study report is due November 1st, 2015. We need to establish a timeline from May 2014 through November 2015 to ensure that these steps, planning, research, writing, and review, are completed. The self-study, Creating a Useful Process and Report, the Pink Book, will be our guide in revising our self-study design report and meeting the expectations of Dr. Schneider. As noted on page 13 of the Pink Book, it is of the utmost importance that we follow the advice stated in regard to evidence, that we meet each standard, planning and outcomes assessment, and resources. The statement made by Dr. Schneider is as follows. In regard to document inventory, see as described in the self-study, Creating a Useful Process and Report on page 21, but especially pages 42 through 46. You indicate sources for the answers to each research question, but that is very general. It would be helpful for someone other than the working groups to provide more specific guidance as to the documents that exist, what and where they are, and how they relate to not only the standards in general, but the fundamental elements of those standards. I strongly feel that Harcum College is in need of an institutional researcher in order to successfully complete the self-study design report. We need to make sure that the working group questions are analytical, asking how well and how effective, and not merely descriptive. Dr. Schneider makes a statement in regarding to the working group questions. Make sure they are analytical and not just descriptive. How and what questions can go either way. The self-study will not be a list of Q&A, but analytical narrative, a research paper with results of research, not all evidence. The site visit team won't see the design and questions. Questions' only purpose is to get you to think analytically. Make sure there are enough questions at high enough a level to evoke all the analysis and evidence you will need to demonstrate compliance with all the fundamental elements of every standard. We say don't just repeat the fundamental element, but do check regularly to make sure no important aspect has been lost. This slide presents Dr. Schneider's feedback on the success of the working group's questions in addressing the fundamental elements of each standard of excellence. As you can see, there is work to be done. Even though some groups may not need to make improvements to their questions, I am asking that all groups take a critical look at their questions and resubmit them as noted to be incorporated into the revised self-study design report. The document roadmap is another aid provided by the Middle States Commission to guide institutions in supplying supporting evidence that each standard has been met. Copies of the document roadmap were available to all working group members at the February 4th meeting and can be found on the Middle States website as indicated. Our mission as a steering committee from now through the end of August is to revise the working group questions as recommended by Dr. Schneider, to resubmit the self-study design report by June 30th, to identify the documents desired for each working group question, to locate each document, just to find out if it exists or if it does not exist, and to establish a baseline of documents that do exist and of the documents needed.